Hello, my name is Gail Norry. I want to welcome everyone to the JOFA webinar, Queen for a Day. I am speaking to you from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I am a parent and advocate for children with special needs. And I am also proud to have been involved with founding a program called OROT in the Jewish day schools in the Philadelphia area. And I have with me Maxine Rosaler, who wrote the book, Queen for a Day. And just really excited to have this opportunity and to give everyone the opportunity to hear about Maxine's book, first and foremost, and then ultimately, to answer some of your questions. So Maxine, why don't I first turn it over to you to just give us a little background and tell us about your book.
Okay, well, my book is basically about the emotional lives of the mothers of children with autism and other disabilities as well. Is that, okay, whatever, I don't know what that was. Anyway, and it basically, the central narrative of the book follows Mimi Slavitt, who is very much based on myself. And which it starts with her denial of that there's anything wrong with her son, and then it travels through her grief, and then with her sort of acceptance of that there's something terrible, something wrong with her child, and how she's going to deal with it. And interwoven with her, the central narrative of her emotional journey, are the stories of a number of other mothers and how their lives intersect with hers. And all of these characters are, including Mimi, are very deeply flawed characters who have a lot of difficulty dealing with the fact that their children have anything wrong with them, and dealing with the system that they have to deal, dealing with the struggles of the system. So it's all about struggle, emotional, internal, external struggles, and then the interaction of these women with each other.
Great, yeah. I really thought that it was such an open and honest depiction that for me, it was, really fascinating. I think that many of us experience, you're first finding out that your child may have some issues in and of itself is a lot to grapple with. How each of us takes that journey, deciding when you are ready to actually have testing done in and of itself is especially difficult. And I know for the two of us, Maxine, we've shared that doing this 20 years ago was also a very, very different landscape. There were many fewer children who were diagnosed at the time, and that I think we both shared that we felt very much alone at the time.
Yeah, well, and for me, I mean, there was a long period of denial, which actually lasted before there was a long period where I just didn't want to get Benji diagnosed at all, that I couldn't admit that there was anything wrong with him. And then also the thought of going into the social services system was so repugnant to me, or having my son classified as anything. So I resisted that for a very long time. And even after he was diagnosed, I was still in denial, kept on saying, well, doesn't quite fit the diagnosis. And then I deceived myself into thinking that he was going to recover, because I used a method known as applied behavioral analysis, ABA, which promised a 47% cure rate. And so I dealt with that for a long time. And I think that really didn't help. In fact, it was really interesting. One of the reviewers of my book said something which I found very kind of elucidating. And she said that rather than dealing with her child's handicaps, the author kept on hoping that her son would get better. And that's true. My direction was totally wrong. So I really it was a very bad direction for me to go in, and for any mother to go in. And I feel like that's the first thing. And I think the first thing you have to start working on is acceptance, which is very long, difficult process. And then how are you going to help your child within the context of whatever his limitations are?
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
the search for services
Yes.
is an abomination. The system treats you like a criminal and a beggar and or like a crazy person. And so you're really thrown into this whole other world that no one is prepared to deal with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's something mothers should really be prepared for. And that's why I think it's very important that mothers help each other and they know they're not alone. And I guess now they're no longer as alone as we were, because when our kids were diagnosed, autism was almost an unknown entity.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, and I found that it was also very difficult, as you said, that the system seems to, want to fit you in to their, you were a square peg in their round hole, and it didn't matter because it seemed to constantly be an uphill battle over the economics. And so if they had a classroom in their public school that was for all children with special needs, your child should go into that classroom,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't necessarily really in your child's best interest. So
it's not only that, it's like I would go to these meetings, and either they would tell me, well, your son is so smart, he doesn't even need services, right. Or else I would go there begging for services, and right. They'd say, well, if your son needs so many services, then he belongs in an institution. Right. So you sort of have to really learn how to play the system and right. balance how much you're going to play up your son's disability right. and how much you're going to downplay it. So you really have to. It's really an act of politics.
Right.
You have to sort of, and then also you have to sort of cozy up to the people who you really end up hating because they treat your child with such disrespect and you with such disrespect. So it's just this whole new world that you enter. And it's certainly an education that all of us would rather have done without, but right. Certainly you learn a lot.
Yeah. And I found even when I had the services that were best suited to my son, that I still had to walk that fine line every 3 or 4 months. Whenever you were trying to re-up the service, you had to constantly show that there was progress, but not too much progress. So you still needed to advocate so that you could continue to have, in my case, we were very successful in having our son ultimately mainstreamed for part of the day. But when he was in the mainstream classroom, he needed an aide. So that was something that was obviously expensive for the school district to pay for. And yet, he could be mainstreamed. And like you said, he also was very bright. And so he did very well in a mainstream environment for most of the day. And so we fought to continually have that aid with him. But as you said, it was this constant gain. And, you didn't want to feel like you were taking advantage of the system, but you really had to know that you were doing what was best for your child.
Well, also, when you start out, when I started out, I was never used to asking anyone for anything.
Right.
And so I felt very shy and timid, really, about asking
yeah.
for anything. And
I think that's very difficult. I really do. And I don't know whether, again, that's something more typical in the Jewish environment, but I remember somebody saying to me as well, you could even get diapers and, formula or, he was.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But I said, I'm comfortable with those things. I always plan on paying for that for my child, but what I do need is X. And
yeah, so, but it's also true. Again, it's such a weird thing because as soon as your son ends up making progress, and I mentioned this in my book in an anecdote where Mimi has a relationship with the mother of her landlord, the wife of her landlord, and they have a disabled child, and they have this experience where they went to an occupational therapist, and the occupational therapist, she learned how to hold a spoon. She had a different disability. I guess she doesn't really need occupational therapy anymore. Right. And so basically you're constantly walking that fine line. Yeah. And so you have to sort of work the system, and you have to lie to a certain extent. You can't
Yeah.
be completely honest about anything because you're always playing people.
Right.
And then people, of course, are playing you. But
Right.
I find it's interesting, like now, I mean, I know that I'm jumping ahead of us and, but of ourselves, but I never got any help within, from the schools. Benji, I fought for every school Benji ever went to, and none of the schools ever helped him. But I find like now that I hire the people to work with him and I'm on top of them, I think that maybe your experience was different, that now he's finally getting the help he needed, but he didn't really get helped by the special education system
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in my situation, what was challenging was that I did not feel that there was an appropriate placement in the public schools. So we wanted Ben to have a Jewish education. So we were very fortunate that we found a preschool that actually had gotten Federation funding to start a classroom for children with special needs. And then by the time he was in the pre-K environment, at that point, we started advocating to have an aide so he could be mainstream for most of the day. And it was a very, very new system at the time, that people really hadn't heard of this. And I was very fortunate that the head of the preschool was very committed to having Ben there. And there was even a parent who threatened to remove her child from the classroom if Ben were in the class. And the director of the preschool at the synagogue said, "That's your choice." But she absolutely wasn't, removing Ben from the classroom. So I felt very lucky, especially in those days where people weren't as educated as they are today.
Well, I don't know. I think it probably depends on the child. But with Benji, what happened was the school really didn't know what to do with him. So basically, I would hire all of the aides to go to school with him, and they would do all the work. And the school really did nothing. And it was really a really horrific experience. And it was very eye-opening to me to see how neglectful they were. But, I'm like, he had a speech therapist who used to stick him in the school didn't have a principal. And so she became like the sub principal. And during speech therapy, she would stick him in watching videos or something. So it was very disheartening. I don't think you can trust the system. You have to evaluate the system. And in some cases, I don't want to make a blanket indictment against them, but that was certainly my experience.
Yeah.
And maybe it has to do with Benji's particular unusual combination of assets and deficits. I mean, he's very intellectually gifted, but very behaviorally challenged. And I think that they don't really know how to deal with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is that the behavioral challenges can be very overwhelming. I think to classroom environments, but yet I think that the socialization is so important for them that it's often challenging when they're placed in a classroom that is not in an inclusion environment. If they're in just a special ed classroom, then they don't see the socialization, they don't see the behavioral modeling of the typical kids. So to me, that was one of the greatest challenges. I agree.
Well, I mean, again, your experience was very different from mine because Benji was in classrooms and his socialization was really not addressed. No one tried to integrate him in with other kids, and no kids reached out to him. And so it was a very different experience. Right now, in fact, I'm trying to find him a friend. He's 26 years old and he hasn't got a friend. And actually, a friend of mine in the Jewish community is reaching out to the Jewish community to see, and I think the Jewish community can be enormously helpful because there are kids who want to help other kids. Yeah. And so now I'm really going back to that because Benji went to yeshiva for 3.5 years. I'm not religious, but it was the only school that would accept him and that I would accept. But it really, it didn't work out. Right. And I was actually hoping that, I was all ready to turn religious and, keep kosher and light Shabbos candles and do everything. But yeah. But Benji actually never really, I thought that he would be interested in that, but he wasn't. For some reason, he wasn't. It didn't really appeal to him. Unfortunately, I'd hoped that it would.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful thing to have a community.
Right, absolutely. And like you said, I think everybody has, their unique experience. And I was very, very fortunate because the Jewish day school where my older daughter was attending actually had hired a new headmaster. The school had previously not been very willing to accommodate kids with special needs. But it was fortuitous that this new headmaster that had been hired around the same time that I was asked to go on the school's board came from Chicago, where he was involved with starting a program there for kids with special needs. So he was very willing to work with me, and we got the Federation on board, and together we did start this program called the OROPE program for kids with special needs in the Jewish day schools. And ultimately it was in 5 schools in Philadelphia. We have about 50 children a year. So we were very, very lucky. The community did rally. It wasn't always, it's still not in our high schools. Unfortunately, the high school has not been as welcoming. And, but yet the community has been wonderful. And I have to say the other piece that's been terrific, and I don't know whether this can be a resource for you, Maxine, or for others out there, but the Friendship Circle is a newer organization that came into Philadelphia a number of years ago when Ben was still young. And as you spoke about, that there are many children who are willing to befriend children with special needs. That's the exact premise. The Friendship Circle tries to bring together, typical children to befriend and have relationships with children with special needs. And in Philadelphia, and I don't know if this is the typical model in other cities, but I know it's in many other cities now. They have on Sundays, like a Sunday circle for a few hours, and they bring together the kids, again, the typical kids with special needs, and many of them form long-term relationships. My son Ben didn't really love the Sunday circles, but they sent in what they called a friend at home. So this young man Jake came, and he taught Ben to play backgammon and frisbee, and to try and get him to be more social. I remember once having him with his family for Shabbat dinner, and he coached Ben how to be friendlier with the other kids. And it's the most challenging piece, I think.
Well, that's great. What can I say? I'm envious because Benji right now, Benji's doing something known as self-direction, and they have it. They have it in various states, which means you get to hire your own people to work with your child. When Benji was graduating high school, I had no idea what he was going to do. And so, but he always wanted to go to college. So I said, okay, he has to go to college. How is he going to go to college when he's in a classroom of 6 kids with 2 teachers and often with an aide, and he still calls out? But I had to do it, so I did it. And so I started hiring people to go to school with him. And basically what's happened is the mentors, I call them mentors, who work with him have become his friends. And I've discovered through the process, and I'm able to I've really learned how to pick people to work with him. They have to have like the prerequisites of a certain level of competence and intelligence, but if they don't have a good heart and they don't really seem open to loving Ben or caring about Benji, then I get rid of them right away. Yeah. Anyway, so I find like through this process of him working with these people who I really love and who love Benji, he's developed this real social need and this hunger for socialization, which almost frightens me because he used to like to spend a lot of time alone. However, given the fact that all these people are so wonderful with him, he finds like he really doesn't want to spend that much time alone. But that's not the real world, because basically I've created an artificial paradise for him. So now I'm trying desperately to go on to the next step of finding him friends, peers, people who will be interested in what he's interested. So if anyone's out there and you have a kid who loves playing Scrabble, loves geography, science, blah, 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 please do contact me because I'm really always looking for a friend for Benji, and it has to be around his interests. I don't know about your son, we both have Bens, Ben and Benji. Whether or not your son, for Benji, I think it has to be around his interests because he has no interest in being autistic per se. Mm-hmm. Like if he would just make a joke, he loves playing with words. And so he'd say his sister was artistic and he was autistic. But that's about the only thing he's ever said about being autistic. So basically, so the groups around children who have autism don't seem to really work for him, because I feel like often these groups become very sort of political and say it's great to be autistic, accept us as we are. But I don't feel like that's the route to go for him with him. I just don't.
Yeah.
Although I guess I should try everything. I've tried it, but it hasn't worked.
Yeah. It's interesting though. I mean, Ben also did have a lot of people coming into the house working with him one-on-one doing ABA, actually, that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, we did that too with Benji, yeah.
Right. And he also would consider them his friends. And I think that, you know what, it's a nice way to start off at least the modeling and learning the reciprocity. You know, for my son loves America's Got Talent. It's his favorite show. So for, you know, he would, if you would sit down and watch show after show after show with him, you know, he just, you know, he could keep you captivated for hours and hours. But it really has taken years for us to, Ben, you can't just demand for people to watch with you, and it can't be the whole time that you want or the order that you want, and really teaching him step by step to, you might want to watch this for an hour, but maybe, you know, this friend could watch football for an hour, and you have to be interested, and really taking him through step by step.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is a problem, because with the mentors, they tend to indulge him.
Right.
And a friend won't indulge him.
Correct.
And I think that he will learn more from a friend. Just like I feel like he would learn, like I don't really let him go out by himself much, right? Although he can draw the entire subway map by heart, he could be on the subway and grab a seat or stand too closely to someone. So I feel like he has to learn. But I feel like there are risks one has to take as the mother of a child with autism.
Yes.
I'm still trying to decide at what point should I take that risk. Because without taking a risk, he's never going to be independent. But there are always going to be things that attract Benji, because Benji is so hungry for knowledge and he's so curious. And that's both his gift and also his, you know, downfall. I mean, it could be very bad for him. Yes. So I don't know how much one can really learn. You have to sort of like really decide, like, what can you really teach your child and what can you not teach him? Right. And I haven't really come to that. I don't really realize what his limits are yet. Have you?
No, I mean, and I feel the same way. You know, Ben, luckily, like, he's wonderful on public transportation. I don't know that he will ever learn to drive. But like you said, I mean, there are times where I really get nervous. Is it too much? Or what if, you know, somebody comes up to him and says the wrong thing or does the wrong thing? Or, you know, it is scary. But like you said, I also feel like, I guess, any one of us who has taught a child to drive, you know, it's always scary when you give them the car keys for the first time for them to go out on their own. But we take risks to some extent with all of our children. It just feels scarier and there's more unknown. I think. Yeah,
I mean, the world is a dangerous place, period.
Right.
But however, with a child like, you know, our children, and I can speak about Benji, he's very impulsive still. And I don't know, but I don't really know if he can control his impulse, but I really have a feeling that when he's alone, when he's on his own, I feel like he must feel a greater sense of responsibility. I feel like something really must take place in him. And, you know, and he loves origami. That's one of his interests. And so I decided, well, his mentor couldn't really, you know, go and take him to origami. So I figured, okay, I just decided to take the risk. I know he's going to let him go to origami by himself. And he did. And I think that because he was going from one place to a place that he really wanted to go to, that maybe something happened, but it's all such an unknown, really.
Right, exactly. I also feel that, you know, again, everybody has an individual situation. I mean, we've been very fortunate that also our rabbi has been incredibly welcoming and inclusive. Our synagogue was very committed to, although initially our first synagogue, the preschool, really did not feel comfortable having him there. We just happened to be lucky to be near another synagogue preschool that had started this program for children with special needs. So they were able to accommodate him. But my synagogue as a whole has been very supportive. They committed to helping Ben become bar mitzvah. And then, you know, just in general, I find them to be a very welcoming environment. And there is actually this young man, Ami, who is very physically impaired and is in a wheelchair and has been included in the men's choir, even though he can't really vocalize like the other. And so I think that really setting the stage and being more inclusive and more accepting, especially by our spiritual leaders, can also make a huge difference for families.
Well, yes, I mean, if you can get that, and I think it's very important. And I think that, again, I don't think I never really found a community for Benji, and right now I'm trying to form one. And I formed like a little community for him.
Yeah.
But it has to really expand. And I think that being an observant Jew really helps. And I think it's a wonderful gift. And I think it's very unfortunate that that, you know, Benji has not benefited from that. But you know, what can I say? Just didn't work out. I was hoping the yeshiva would work out, but it didn't.
Right.
So, I think that a yeshiva education can be really good for some kids, but I don't think necessarily, this is based on my own experience. I think that you have to be really careful when you have a child with a serious disability I think that the disability has to take priority over everything else. And because I know from my own experience, because Benji went to Kosher, the Kosher Academy, and I know that there were parents there who decided to take their children out of the school because they weren't addressing their needs. And then the Jewish education would have to take place in the home. So I think it's a very individual decision.
Yeah.
You have to really realize, you know, set your priorities.
Right.
I think that's very important.
But I think you're right. No matter what, I mean, I think we all feel that our children have to come first, and so you know, you just hope that the community is willing to be supportive. And it's difficult if they're not as welcoming as we would like. But hopefully, times have also changed, as we said, in the last 20 years, and people, you know, are somewhat more accepting than certainly they had been. I think, you know, extended family also can play a very important role. I mean, you know, we were fortunate that, you know, Ben's grandparents were very accepting, but I think it's difficult for them. Again, it's not something they were used to. And you talked about the desire for, you know, us wanting our child to be cured, and was that ever realistic? That was something, you know, that my father would speak about. You know, you know, every time he saw him, he was getting better, and he was sure he was going to be cured. And I mean, you know, there was definitely that sense of disappointment that, you know, I didn't want to disappoint my father, but I knew Ben was never going to be cured.
Well, it's funny, like the title story in my book, Queen for a Day, is based on a very close friend of mine. And I had one of the scenes in the story is the father, you know, and this woman just gave her life to her son. She did everything. And he would just sit there just saying, you can do it. You can cure him. And it didn't happen. And I think what happens with autism too, in terms of the whole idea of the cure, is I think that any parents who say their kid was cured, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I don't feel like if your kid is really autistic, he will ever be cured. And I feel like if a kid is quote unquote cured, then he never had autism in the first place. And so I think that one of the most important things for parents of children with disabilities is to realize that you have to, again, work within the context of that disability. And for me, I would say that I'm still in a process of acceptance, and I really won't reach an acceptance, and I really won't release myself from the anxiety until I have a very clear picture about what Benji's life is going to be like, especially after I die. Because after I die, you know, I'm just holding everything together. And so that's another thing that parents really have to worry about. I think it's the first thing you think about, I think, when your child is diagnosed with a serious disability is first, what's he going to be like when he's an adult? And then you think, once once he gets older and older and older, you skip death, you skip old age, and you go straight to your death, and you think, what is going to happen to my child when I die? And that's something I'm grappling with now. And all, you know, parents I know, every parent I know is grappling with that. We're all terrified about what's going to happen, and we have to really set up a system. And especially when we've taken the care of our children completely when it's under our own control, then it becomes all the more frightening. Who is going to do this? And so it's a big dilemma. You know, and some people, I believe you have have children who, you know, can take care of your son. And some people do and some people don't. And I don't think that was something that I could put on my daughter. And right now, what I'm doing with the mentors is I'm sort of trying to collect a little group of people who I think who really truly care about Benji. And I want to get as many as possible so that when I'm dead, I know that I will have people who will at least be able to be sort of quality control over who works with him in the future. So that's kind of my master plan, is to sort of seduce people into working with Benji. I'm not really seducing them, but they are seduced because he's so lovable. And then, you know, and then that they, you know, they will care enough to take care of him if they're around, but you have to get as many people as possible.
Right. And, you know, there are some situations where there are homes that, you know, group homes, for instance. I know in Philadelphia, there's an organization called JOFA, which is for adults with disabilities. And again, you know, every community has, you know, slightly different offerings. Ben currently is in a program where they are supporting him to live independently in an apartment, and he's working part-time and going to school part-time. And, you know, but he certainly needs almost daily supervision. I mean, I speak to my husband, speaks to him, our children. The program also, we pay for people to be going into the apartment, supervising, and, you know, making sure he's on top of taking his medication, keeping the apartment neat, eating healthy, exercising, you know, everything. So it's a lot of responsibility, as you're saying, for any one person to really assume, if, you know, when we're no longer here. So I think we all need to be advocating for our communities to be looking into providing environments that can be beneficial to our children when they're older.
Well, what I hope is that there'll be some kind of organizational support to be to sort of do the nitty gritty hard work. But I feel like for Benji and for all of our children, the most important thing is to have someone to do quality control and to make sure that the people who care for him really care about him. And I feel like, I know I've made a lot of mistakes. I mean, I've hired well over 100 people to work with Benji since he was diagnosed at the age of 4.5. And I've learned a lot, because at first I really didn't, know people, but I feel like I've gotten to really know them and to recognize who really cares and who doesn't care, and how very important that is. So I'm really, I think that's really the most important thing. And again, it's a great unknown. You really don't know what's going to happen, but I think that you can set up. And I think with autism, I know it's the most important thing is to find, most children with autism a lot of children with autism are very directed by their interests. And I think it's very important, and Temple Grandin always says this, and it's true, is what you do is you have to identify the interest. Okay, so that's what I'm doing with Benji. Benji has so many interests. I mean, he's majoring in chemistry. He's majoring in chemistry in college, but he's not going to be able to do chemistry. So I have to think about something that he can do that will engage him enough sufficiently that he can do on his own and really be interested enough to maintain his attention. And I'm not looking at him working in an office either, because I don't think that he would ever really, that environment would never suit him. It certainly never suited me. So you have to really look at your child and really just like create an incredible, like an entire picture of what his or her abilities are, and then what kind of environment would suit him, and then go from there. Because it's very important, I think, that the child have something to do that is of interest to him. I mean, it doesn't have to be any great intellectual thing. Like, I have a friend whose kid is just so sweet and loving, that the place for her to be maybe would be in an old age home where she would be helpful, where she would be a joy for the people, just to have love and attention and the spark of bright light in their lives. And so really it's just a matter of like, first of all, you have to completely drop your whatever middle class expectations you have. You can just let that go out the window. And it all has to be about the child and what kind of environment you're going to find for him.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think that is a very, very important point. And I think, like you said, what is going to bring them joy and can bring joy to others. And I will say that is, it's, when you find that, I think that's the ideal for both parties.
Now, in terms of the emotional struggle, I just want to go back to that, because I feel like that's always been the focus of my writing and certainly the focus of my book. And I think that's really the way other mothers, I think, can help. I mean, other mothers help each other in two major ways. If there's the emotional support, just knowing that other people are suffering or enduring and persevering as you are. And then also we end up becoming like lawyers. We end up like having talks like, oh, well, about this and you got to work this angle and that angle. And so I think it's very important to begin with to accept the fact that you're in pain and to recognize that pain and not to deny it, and to even accept the fact that you might get angry at your child sometimes, because that's inevitable, because I think the frustration becomes greater. The greater the expectations, the greater the frustrations. So I think that you have to sort of recognize all that and not deny. I mean, the denial can almost be like the theme of being the mother of a child with a disability, right? Because first you deny there's anything wrong, and then you just you deny your bad feelings or feel. And so, I'd like to talk about that a little bit, Gail. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right.
For us to be of help to other mothers, I think we really have to get into the feelings, because that's what everyone lives with. They live with their feelings.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I one of what my constant emotions, I'm always saying, I feel like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or some days it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or just when you thought you had something kind of, managed, that, it just seems to crop up again. Ben has before his love of America's Got Talent, he was addicted to Survivor. And, it was like he lived that show, and he became, hysterical beside himself when the wrong person was winning. And I just can't tell you, he would talk about actually wanting to hurt somebody. And, it was scary that he could become so obsessed with this. So I can't tell you how many weekly therapy sessions went into acknowledging his feelings and how to, and how to move on from there for him, and to manage, this is a show that brings him joy, but it's very detrimental to his well-being also. So, and like you said, they become obsessed with these interests of theirs. So,
well, yeah, like Benji, I like to address 2 issues. One is dealing with the ups and downs, because what happens is when Benji is good, has a good day, or like yesterday, for example, I had a meeting with some people, right, with the team, with some team members and other people, that resources I've found out about. By the way, you have to constantly be searching for resources, because you never know what's out there. I just discovered something's out there and I had no idea it was there. And Phil, my husband, told me that Benji called him and said, "Daddy, there's a group meeting. Where are you?" And do you know how unusual that is? I mean, it's really funny, because for us, what our children do, which any typical child would do a zillion times, and that child does it once, and it's a major breakthrough. So your child has a major breakthrough in a wonderful moment, and your heart just opens with joy, and then something bad happens and you're devastated again. Right. And that's constant. You're on a constant roller coaster of emotion. Yes. And yes. I don't think it ever stops, really. But I feel like one thing that's really helped me, and that there's an enormous source of support to me, is to surround him again with people who care about him, mm-hmm. and who I can relate to, because mm-hmm. then I know I'm not alone, and that he's being taken care of, and that progress is being made little bit by little bit. But again, right. It's inevitable. All these setbacks are going to happen. Right. I mean, like one day, like for example, like last week, he was obsessed with the snow. Mm. Why isn't it going to snow? And what are you going to do about that? Right. Well, God, please, yeah. Snow. A little snow.
Haven't figured out how to make it snow? I can't believe you.
I know, right? Yeah. I mean, really, it's like it almost becomes irrational. Exactly. I mean, it is irrational. And Benji is very sane, which is kind of interesting. He's very sane, but then these obsessions can make him irrational. So
right. That's been my experience as well. Ben has always been a very concrete thinker. And so it's actually interesting, going back even to the religious piece. For a while, I didn't think it was something that Ben was really going to be able to own. And but ultimately, it was interesting. Something like being kosher was very concrete to him. And, he just, there are things, like you talked about Friday night. We're fortunate the program that he's in does have a Friday night, get together once a month. And he really enjoys that. It's something that is social, that he's comfortable with, lighting candles, being kosher, things that were very concrete to him, he could understand. It's the higher level spiritual piece that is a little, more amorphous to him. But I think that it is another area that it can be challenging for families, on how to incorporate a child with special needs to understand that piece.
Well, it's just very, it's again looking at the child as an individual. Also, I just popped into my mind. It's like an ongoing debate I've been having with a very close friend of mine. Okay. And it's identifying yourself, like, dealing again, my desire, I have a very keen desire to help other mothers with children with disabilities. And she's always saying, oh, she thinks of herself as a mother of a child with a disability. And I'm always arguing with her, and I'm saying, well, I don't think that helps to characterize yourself as the mother of a child with a disability, because I think that sort of reduces you, and reduces your individuality, reduces your child's individuality, and it really doesn't do any good at all. I never really see myself that way. I just see myself as Benji's mother. In fact, I don't even see myself I don't see Benji as a child with a disability. I see him as an individual with all, my life might be completely consumed with dealing with his handicaps. And I'm not, averse to saying handicap. I think you should really just say what it is. And, although my life is consumed with that, I really feel I don't generalize and reduce him to a child with a handicap. But I also don't like people saying, oh, everyone's got problems, big, so your kid's autistic. No, it's a whole different kettle of fish. It's a big deal. Right. But I think that in order for mothers to know that they really need to know in order to take care of themselves. I don't think it serves any purpose doing that. And speaking about taking care of yourself, like I know one of the first things that happened with me when I was on the phone constantly, and I know I spoke to one friend and said, well, you've got to take care of yourself. Everyone said, you got to take care of yourself. You got to take care of yourself. And I never took care of myself. I said, how can you take care of yourself when there's so much work to be done? But one of the first things I say to parents, to mothers who, ask me for advice is you've got to take care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of your child. And also, do you know that statistically the mothers of children with disabilities have shorter lifespans? Did you know that? Because the anxiety and the stress really wears you down. So you have to sort of realize how important that is. And that's really something like after all these years, it took all these years for me to realize how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you do that? Do you realize that, Gail? Do you take care of yourself?
I will say that I started exercising when Ben was a baby, and I think that has really helped me. It was like my time to whatever release that was for me was really, really helpful. And as you said, I think we were also lucky to find advocates and support to come in the home when they were doing, for instance, when we did the applied behavioral analysis, that I was able to find people at colleges nearby that came in and did a lot of that. So even though I coordinated the program and was at all the team meetings and constantly, on top of, where he was with the program and moving him along, I almost never had to do the teaching. So that was like a break for me when they would come in and be with him.
See, that's another thing also in terms of limitations, like knowing your limitations just brings that up to me, because so much of my time was spent fighting the system. Right. And I would fight for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I once spent 2 solid weeks just trying to break some rule they have. Mm-hmm. And you really have to choose your battles. I think it's very important to do that, because if you fight everything, then you're going to exhaust yourself. So basically what I'm my advice to other mothers is, don't be like me. Don't be like Mimi in the book, just take care of yourself and really choose your battles. Although you have to realize that it is a battle. Right. But also like this one story in my, again, the title story in Queen for a Day, it begins with a mother coming up to the main character in the story, and she's crying, and she's and she's seeing the mother is on the subway platform and her child is clearly autistic, and she comes up to the character Amy and says, she starts crying, and I admire you so much for what you've done. I left my child. I couldn't do it. And again, people have their limitations, and I don't believe that being the mother of a child of a disability changes you and makes you a different person. Right. I think you are who you are regardless, and you're capable of you might discover that you're capable of doing certain things, but I feel like not everyone can do what you've done, what I've done, what other mothers have done. And I think you have to recognize your limitations and not blame yourself for them. Right. You have to forgive yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. But, you did, I was so impressed in the book, with your story about how you had done so much of the legal work really for that, the first woman who had actually won your case in terms of getting the school district to pay for the yeshiva, even though ultimately you had to battle her for the money. And so
I literally spent a solid year of my life, fighting the Board of Education because what happened was in the book the advocate I hired didn't do her job. And so basically screwed me out of like tens of thousands of dollars. And so I was so obsessed with having to get that money back because of the symbolic betrayal of it, that I became like a lawyer. I was writing legal briefs, but again, I'm very obsessive too. So that wasn't so good, but it did feel like
The lesson of, like you said, choosing your battles, so you don't get lost in certain battles, but you choose the important ones to fight. And you were fighting for your child to go to the right school at that time for him, and you know that you succeeded in. So that's so.
Well, no, but the thing is, I didn't succeed because I thought that he was the right school.
Well,
But there's a lot of self-deception too, because a lot of times you think that something is working for your child because you, or someone you think or fall in love with is just great. I mean, I've had people work with Benji who I think are great, and it turns out that they just were betraying me, and not doing their job. So again, you know, there's a lot of, you know, you have to sort of really learn to see past people, to see the truth.
Yeah, I actually am seeing just a few comments here. I just want to remark. Somebody commented that sometimes when you advocate, you realize that you'd be better off teaching your child yourself rather than asking them to do their jobs, which is, you know, interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, like one of the things that sort of leads me to sort of saying what I, you know, I think I said before is like here, hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on Benji's education, but I feel like his education began after I took control over who would work with him. Teaching him yourself, some people can do that. And again, that's probably true because the more control the mother has, the more certain you are that your child's getting what he needs. Because I would go to parent-teacher meetings, for example, and I go from teacher to teacher saying, oh, he's doing so great, he's doing so great. And then I got to the social studies teacher. They say, God, he doesn't pay attention in class. So basically they're all lying to you. So you really have to be very careful. And it's true, if you could do the whole thing yourself, well, as one would say, God bless you, but you know, not everyone can, right?
Yeah.
And I can certainly understand that.
Yeah, it's true. I'm just also seeing another comment. I'm nodding my head at everything. Yes, day school isn't for everyone. Yes, family support is incredible. My folks and in-laws have been incredible and never thought he'd be cured, but were awed by his progress. I ended up moving my son into an apartment with an aide while we were still young ourselves because we know he won't be around. We won't be around forever. He's done so well in the apartment, such growth. My daughter and son-in-law are both more than comfortable caring for him when we're no longer around. I'm very blessed. He's 33 and in a place I could never have imagined when he was 4. In terms of community support, he works 3 days a week at our shul. The executive director gives him all kinds of office work that he enjoys. Everyone there thinks he's terrific. That's amazing. It really is, that they are, you know, found a place for him where he's happy and he brings joy to other people. I think is an amazing.
No, I think, I mean, that's so wonderful to have a community. My son's in his, you know, your son's in his own apartment. My son's in his own apartment, but my son lives with, I hired someone to live with him. And the first person he was living with him was completely, didn't have anything to do with him. This girl is so amazing. She knocks on his door and says, you want to come in? And she brings people to engage him. And again, you have to be really very careful about that. If I had to do it over again, I would pull my son out of his suburban public school. The prevailing attitude was, let's get these kids to the finish line. I actually got into an argument with one of the psychologists who refused to answer a question I had about my child. She told me to ask my supervisor. Ugh. Yes, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. That's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. And there was also a question about the Jewish community being there for our children after we're gone. And again, you know, I think that fortunately I've seen tremendous progress and attitudes changing over the years. And I think that it's also up to us to be advocates along the way. And whether, you know, this person who was able to find a job at their synagogue for their child, I think is amazing. I think, you know, letting our needs be known and trying to get these community institutions to do their part. You know, it's their job, but it's also up to us to let it be known that we need them.
Well, yes, and also I think that people who are truly religious really believe in doing mitzvahs. They
Mhm.
really do. You know, it's funny, like I was online in the supermarket once or someplace and I dropped something, right? And this woman said to her son, you know, he was wearing a yarmulke, and he said, no, pick it up. For, you know, I said, no, I can pick it up. No, you pick it up. He says, that's a mitzvah, you know, and it was so beautiful. The mother was teaching the child to do mitzvahs. So basically, I feel like the whole Jewish philosophy, the morality of Judaism is so beautiful. And I feel like to tap into that, which is what I'm trying to do now. And God, I wish I were religious. I really do. I wish I were, if I had to do it all over again, you know what? That might be the way to go, because you really need a community. And
Yeah.
so really, it's a very fortunate thing, but still I'm going to tap into that, you know, and there are some beautiful, beautiful people. And what I've been amazed by my experience of hiring people to work with Benji is how many good people there are after having been through the experience, the horror of dealing with all the bad people, right, Gail?
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really, really good point. And I know we need to be finishing up, but I think
Yeah.
that is true that there are a lot of good people out there. And one thing that I think brought us a lot of satisfaction with starting, you know, the special needs program in the Jewish day schools were all of the families with typical children who will come up to us and say how their family and their children were enriched to be in school with Ben. And so, as you said, I mean, it's not just a mitzvah for other people and something that gives you purpose and fulfillment when you do extend yourself to somebody with disability or, you know, anybody in need. But I think it also really is a lesson. And you know, maybe it's particularly timely on all the adversity in our country right now that really is just another important example of ways that we can really, you know, improve the lives of children with disabilities along with our own.
Yeah, I think it really is. It's so true, because if you just recognize the value of goodness and
Yes.
how it's spiritually enriching to be good,
Yeah.
not everyone's going to feel that way, but if you can tap into that, and ultimately that is the truth,
Yeah.
that it's spiritually enriching to be good and to help and to be other people and to be kind. And if you can sort of create a universe for your child, you know, and then and it's possible. It's a lot
Yeah.
of work, but it's possible. But you
Yeah.
have to sort of create that world,
Right.
and create a world that will sustain itself after you're dead.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so that's very good. And, you know, I really like, you
Yeah.
know, lucky you, what can I say? I'm very jealous. I mean, it's wonderful that you've been able to do that with the Jewish community.
Well, and I admire so much all of the hard work that you've put in, and Benji's very lucky to have you. And
Well, you know, same goes for you, and, you know, and really, and I just think that community really is the answer, but finding the right community. And sometimes you just have to create a community from scratch, which is what I'm
correct.
doing.
Right.
So.
And yeah, and as somebody just wrote in also, I want to thank us for the information, but to advocate is a must. So,
Yes, you can never, ever, ever
right.
leave the people in charge. In fact,
Yeah.
you can go to one person. Even when I was creating Benji's Special Needs Trust, I went to the Office of Social Services, and he says, oh no, he has money. He can't have a special needs trust. It took me 2 years because he, you know, so people, you can never believe it all. What I also realized, it all depends on the individual. Everything is so individual,
Yeah.
down to the doctor, down to the teacher, down
Yeah.
to the principal of the school, down to the people you pick to work with your child. People are
Yeah.
so different.
Right.
And there are so many gifted people out there.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just have to learn how to recognize who is gifted and who isn't. And then and so it purifies your world in a way.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you want to look
Yeah.
on the bright side, ha ha ha, right?
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you so much, Maxine.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a
It's been
pleasure.
a pleasure to speak
Yeah.
with you, and thank you to JOFA for you know, really organizing this webinar, and I hope to meet you in person.
Yes, really. It's such a pleasure. I mean, we mothers really have to stick together.
Agreed.
We
Agreed.
really do.
Yeah.
We're